Load shedding is back this morning. Once again, Eskom says the national grid is taking severe strain because of a massive cold front and breakdowns at several power stations. Stage 2 load shedding started at 9 o'clock this morning and will last up until 10 o'clock tonight. Eskom says it's struggling to keep the lights on after 4 generating units broke down at the Medupi, Duva, Majuba and Letabo power stations. Eskom is now asking people to use electricity sparingly. The rand was boosted by movements in the dollar yesterday, where the greenback plummeted to 2-year lows. The local currency clawed back ground against the dollar overnight, with the rand now trading at around 17 rand 32. Giving us more detail and analysis on how the markets are performing in the early trade. We're joined now on the line by Jimmy Moyaha, market analyst at AxiTrader. Jimmy, good morning. Thanks for joining us once again. Give us a sense of how the markets have opened this morning.
Morning, Porter. The market did open slightly weaker this morning, and that's largely off the back of what we've seen around the local markets. We've seen that emerging markets are back in favor. Everybody globally is looking to go back into trading emerging markets, but we did see that the concerns around the load shedding that we have and the performance around the South African market saw it open a bit weaker. At the moment, it is only marginally down at about 0.1% down. We've seen that the rand has indeed strengthened, sitting at around the 17.29 mark. Got as low as about 17.26 not so long ago. But I guess that, like we said, that's largely off the back of increased dollar rather than increased rand strength. And you see that translates to our local markets aren't performing as well as our currencies are performing at the moment.
Let's take a look at some company business news now. Cura Holdings released their results for the interim 6-month period ending the 30th of June of 2020. Take us through the group's performance.
No, certainly. I mean, the notable thing there, so far they've reported that revenues are up about 7%. On the downside, though, they're saying that their HEPS are going to be down around 23%. So we're expecting headline earnings per share to go from about 50 cents to around 38.7 cents. Their earnings before interest and taxes gone up about 12% to about 466 million. What they've also seen is they've seen a slight increase in learner numbers of about 5%. If we look at the financials themselves, I mean, their performance in terms of their unaudited results, the income statement is showing that they're a lot lighter than they were in the 2019 6-month period. And I guess this is largely off the back of what we've seen happen from our side locally, what we've seen with schools, and the inability to sort of be operational at full capacity and at full strength.
And still with company news, MTN has announced the appointment of Ralph Mopita as the new group president and CEO. Are there any surprises on that front? And perhaps more importantly, how have investors responded to the news?
Investors have definitely received this as a positive response there. If we look at Mr. Mopita, he was the group CFO from around April or so, and he's got a strong understanding of the business. And so his appointment was not only backed by comments made by the group chair, but also the market sees MTN perform quite well. I mean, MTN has been up about 1% since the news. We could see MTN trade back above that 70 rand mark as well, just off the back of these news. So the market's definitely received his appointment quite positively. And like we said, he's got knowledge of the business. He's been within the business, acting as group CFO. So for him to transition from the group financial head to the group CEO it doesn't look like a big stretch from a market's perspective, and the markets definitely received that quite well.
Now, very lastly, the National Treasury has sent out a stern warning that if South Africa can't arrest its ballooning state debt or any default or financial crisis, it could see the country losing 2 trillion rand by the end of the decade. Your sentiments on the stern warning by Treasury?
Well, I completely agree. I mean, we've had this conversation from as far back as December of last year to say that pre-downgrade, there were some real structural changes that were definitely needed from the government side to address this debt burden, particularly because not addressing that, you'll remember we mentioned that was going to be one of the leading causes of the downgrade, and that's exactly what happened. Those changes weren't made. We didn't see that happen. We saw South Africa be downgraded in the middle of an international pandemic, and that hasn't changed much. I mean, we've been fighting the pandemic, and while we do need to keep focusing on fighting the pandemic and that sort of thing, in order for us to redress and change the trajectory of our economy, we need to make those structural changes significantly. I mean, 10% of our debt to GDP or 10% of our national debt cannot be resting in one state-owned entity. We definitely need to be addressing these sorts of things. And I appreciate that Treasury is concerned about this, but at the end of the day, if the government is not going to make significant changes, particularly around the public sector wage bill and around its management of SOEs, then just another warning is not going to make a difference for us. We need to do more than just a warning. We need to actually see the government make structural changes to their policies and to their governance as well. I mean, if it means that we get involved with restructuring how the SOEs are managed, or if the SOEs are no longer managed by government, but managed differently through the private and public partnerships that we've spoken about previously, then that's the way we need to go. But just issuing a warning about it and not doing anything about that is not going to be enough.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure having you on the show. Jimmy Moyaha, market analyst at AxiTrader, giving us a sense of how the markets are faring and the latest developments on company news.